This is the kind of moment that makes people stop scrolling. Because in the NFL, there are lines you just don't cross. And one of them is praising a rival's quarterback this openly, this early, and this confidently. Yet that's exactly what just happened. Zac Taylor, the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, went on record and delivered glowing praise for a rookie quarterback on a division rival. Not a veteran, not a former MVP, a rookie. And not just any rookie, but Shedeur Sanders of the Cleveland Browns. That alone would have been surprising. But what makes this moment explode is who Zac Taylor is and where this respect comes from. Taylor isn't just another NFL coach doing media rounds. He's a proud Nebraska alum. And if you understand college football culture even a little, you know what that means. Nebraska and Colorado isn't just a rivalry, it's generational, it's cultural, it's personal. Fans are raised to dislike everything connected to the other side. And yet Taylor openly admitted he watched Colorado games because of Sanders. That's not coach speak, that's confession. NFL coaches are trained to say nothing, especially about young quarterbacks, especially about division opponents, especially about players they're about to game plan against. Praise creates confidence. Confidence creates problems. And yet Taylor didn't hold back. He talked about Sanders raising the level of a program, about how difficult he is to prepare for, about how real the challenge is. And that's the part that should make everyone pay attention. Because when respect comes from rivals, real rivals, it carries more weight than hype, highlights, or headlines. This wasn't said to motivate fans. It wasn't said to sell tickets. It was said because the tape forced it out of him. And once a coach like Zac Taylor admits that out loud, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders changes instantly. Because praise like this isn't supposed to happen. And when it does, it usually means something bigger is unfolding right in front of us. This wasn't casual praise, and it definitely wasn't accidental. When Zac Taylor spoke about Shedeur Sanders, it landed differently because of who Taylor is and what his job depends on. Taylor isn't a media personality chasing headlines. He's the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, a team locked in a brutal AFC North arms race. His livelihood depends on beating Cleveland, twice a year, every year. In this division, information is guarded, praise is rationed, and respect is rarely shown, especially to young quarterbacks who could become long-term problems. That's what makes his comments so unusual. NFL coaches are trained to be vague for a reason. You downplay opponents, you keep things generic, you don't inflate confidence, and you never hand a rookie extra motivation, especially one you're about to face. But Taylor didn't follow that script. He didn't hedge. He didn't redirect. He openly acknowledged Sanders' impact and described preparing for him as a real challenge. That's not politeness, that's acknowledgement. What makes it hit even harder is Taylor's resume. He's coached deep playoff runs. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's worked closely with elite quarterback play and understands exactly what separates a future franchise QB from someone just riding a hot stretch. When someone with that background singles out a rookie and speaks with that level of respect, it's because the film leaves no room to dismiss what he's seeing. And context matters here. Taylor isn't praising Sanders in a vacuum. He's praising him while his own defense is preparing to stop him, while his staff is breaking down tendencies, while they're building pressure packages specifically designed to confuse young quarterbacks. That's when coaches are most honest, behind the scenes. So when that honesty leaks into public comments, it's telling. There's also an unspoken warning embedded in his words. Coaches don't hype players unless they believe the threat is real. Taylor knows that if Sanders continues on this trajectory, he won't just be another Browns quarterback passing through the division. He'll be someone Cincinnati has to account for long-term. And in the AFC North, long-term threats are taken very seriously. That's why Taylor's praise matters more than any highlight reel or stat line. It wasn't meant for fans. It wasn't meant for headlines. It was the kind of respect that slips out when a coach realizes a problem isn't temporary. And once a division rival head coach reaches that conclusion out loud, the league starts listening differently. To really understand why Zach Taylor's comments stopped people in their tracks, you have to understand the rivalry he crossed without hesitation. This isn't a casual college matchup. The tension between Nebraska and Colorado runs deep enough that fans don't just root against the other side. They're raised too. Nebraska Cornhuskers versus Colorado Buffaloes isn't about rankings or bowl games. It's about identity, pride, generations of bitterness passed down like tradition. In households across the Midwest and the Rockies, allegiance to one side meant automatic rejection of everything tied to the other. Watching the rival wasn't curiosity, it was betrayal. That's why Taylor's admission landed like a shockwave. He didn't say he caught highlights. He didn't say he checked box scores. He admitted he watched Colorado games, as a Nebraska guy, on purpose. And the reason wasn't the team, the system, or the hype surrounding the program. It was one player, Shedeur Sanders. That detail matters more than people realize. Rivalry culture teaches fans and alumni to tune out anything associated with the other side. But Sanders broke through that wall. He made games unignorable. He forced even those conditioned to dislike Colorado football to stop, watch, and respect what was happening on the field. That's rare. That's magnetic. Taylor's comment wasn't just praise, it was an acknowledgement of influence. Sanders didn't just play quarterback at Colorado. He changed who was paying attention. Neutral fans tuned in. Rival fans tuned in. Coaches tuned in. That kind of pull isn't taught or manufactured, it's felt. And that's what makes this moment bigger than one quote. If Sanders could override decades of rivalry bitterness at the college level, it explains why NFL coaches now see him differently. He's not just processing coverages or making throws. He's commanding attention. He's altering perception. He's doing what elite quarterbacks do before the league is even ready to label them as such. This rivalry context reframes Taylor's respect entirely. It wasn't polite. It wasn't strategic. It was reluctant honesty from someone whose background should have made that honesty impossible. And once a player earns respect from someone who's been trained, culturally and competitively, not to give it, that respect carries weight far beyond words. Because if Shedeur Sanders could make a Nebraska alum watch Colorado football, imagine what happens when the entire NFL has no choice but to keep watching him now. Zach Taylor's comments weren't just complimentary, they were revealing. And that's the part most people glossed over. Because when an NFL head coach praises a rookie quarterback this early, it usually isn't about politeness. It's about preparation, and more importantly, concern. When Taylor said that Shedeur Sanders raised the level of a program and made things harder to prepare for, he wasn't talking about hype or storylines. He was talking about what shows up on tape. Coaches don't respect narratives, they respect problems, and Sanders has already become one. Think about what that implies. NFL defenses are built to confuse young quarterbacks, disguised coverages, late rotations, blitz packages designed to force hesitation. Most rookies struggle badly when defenses start throwing the full playbook at them. Taylor's praise suggests Sanders isn't reacting like most rookies. He's processing, adjusting, punishing mistakes. That's why this praise carries so much weight. It's coming from someone whose job is to find weaknesses and who isn't finding enough of them. Taylor also hinted at something deeper: influence. When he talked about Sanders drawing attention to Colorado and elevating a program, he was pointing to a quarterback trait that doesn't show up in box scores: gravity. Some players don't just execute plays, they pull eyes toward them. They change how teams prepare. They make opponents spend extra hours in the film room. That's not normal for a fifth-round rookie. And it's not accidental. Quarterbacks who earn that kind of respect early usually share a few traits: command at the line of scrimmage, calm under pressure, and an instinctive feel for the game. Sanders has shown all three. He's not playing scared. He's not overwhelmed by speed. He's not panicking when his first read disappears. Those are the moments defenses watch most closely, and the moments where Sanders is earning credibility. What Taylor said also reframes the conversation around Sanders' ceiling. This isn't a coach saying, "He's playing well for now." It's a coach signaling, "This is going to get harder." That's a subtle but massive difference. NFL coaches think in timelines. If Taylor is already speaking about Sanders as someone who changes preparation, that means he's projecting forward, not dismissing him as a temporary spark. And here's the key point. Respect like this isn't given to quarterbacks who are benefiting from luck. It's reserved for quarterbacks who force defenses to adapt. So when you strip away the headlines and focus on what was actually said, the message becomes clear. Zach Taylor wasn't complimenting a nice story. He was acknowledging a real, growing problem. And once opposing coaches start framing a rookie quarterback that way, the league usually isn't far behind. While rival coaches were quietly taking notes, something just as important was happening behind closed doors in Cleveland. Because long before outside praise started rolling in, the tone inside the Browns' locker room had already shifted, and that's not easy to do as a rookie. NFL locker rooms aren't forgiving places. Veterans don't care about draft position, hype, or last names. They care about whether you help them win on Sunday. And by all accounts, that's where Shedeur Sanders began earning respect fast. Teammates have consistently pointed to one thing first: growth, not flashes, not highlights, week-to-week improvement. That's the quickest way to win over a locker room, especially at quarterback. Players noticed that Sanders wasn't repeating mistakes. He was correcting them, adjusting protections, communicating better in the huddle, taking coaching and immediately applying it on the field. Leadership showed up in subtler ways too. Sanders didn't try to act like a savior. He didn't point fingers when protection broke down or routes fell apart. Instead, he owned mistakes publicly and handled corrections privately. That matters. Quarterbacks who deflect blame lose trust quickly. Quarterbacks who absorb pressure earn it. What stood out most, according to players, is his presence. Calm when things spiral, vocal when energy dips, direct without being overbearing. Those traits are rare in rookies, especially ones who weren't handed the job from day one. Sanders stepped into a fractured season, with expectations already damaged, and still managed to steady the room. There's also the chemistry factor. Quarterback-receiver trust doesn't come from practice reps alone. It comes from timing, accountability, and confidence. Sanders has been praised for staying late, talking through routes, and making sure everyone is on the same page. That extra effort doesn't go unnoticed. It's how a young quarterback stops feeling like the new guy and starts feeling like the leader. And perhaps the most telling detail is this: no one inside the locker room has pushed back on his presence. No whispers, no divided camps, no subtle distancing. In a league where that happens all the time, silence is powerful. That internal belief matters more than outside narratives. Because when a locker room buys into a quarterback, organizations tend to follow, eventually. Coaches change. Front offices shift. But player belief is hard to manufacture and even harder to ignore. Which is why what's happening inside Cleveland carries so much weight. The respect Sanders is earning isn't loud. It isn't performative. It's organic. And in the NFL, that's usually the clearest sign that something real is taking root. And once that happens, the conversation stops being about potential and starts being about direction. For most of the year, the Browns' season felt like it was slipping away before it ever really began. Expectations were high, but reality hit fast. Inconsistency, injuries, missed opportunities. By the time the calendar flipped to the back half of the schedule, Cleveland wasn't playing for the playoffs anymore. They were playing to survive another disappointing chapter. That's when everything quietly changed. When Shedeur Sanders finally got his opportunity, the season was already labeled a wash by most outsiders. Games didn't matter in the standings. Analysts had moved on. Fans were bracing for another reset. But inside the building, those final weeks became something else entirely, a proving ground. Sanders didn't arrive with promises or grand statements. He arrived with steadiness. And in a season that had spiraled, that steadiness felt different. Drives became organized instead of chaotic. The offense looked calmer, even when things broke down. Players weren't pressing as much because they felt like someone was actually steering the ship. That's what hope looks like in the NFL. Hope isn't about wins piling up overnight. It's about direction. It's about believing that the next snap, the next week, the next season might finally look better than the last. Sanders gave Cleveland that feeling almost immediately. Even in losses, there was progress. Even in tough moments, there was control. Fans felt it too. The energy shifted. Instead of asking, "Who do we draft next?" people started asking, "What happens if we build around this?" That's a massive psychological swing for a franchise that's lived in quarterback uncertainty for decades. One player doesn't just change play calling, he changes conversations. And the timing mattered. Late-season games are brutal for teams with nothing to play for. Effort dips, focus slips, morale cracks, but Cleveland didn't fold. Players kept fighting. Young guys kept developing. Veterans stayed engaged. That doesn't happen without belief at quarterback. Sanders also delivered moments that reinforced it. Calm late-game possessions, confident throws under pressure, decisions that showed awareness, not panic. These weren't miracle plays, they were professional ones. The kind that suggest sustainability instead of luck. That's why this stretch mattered so much. It reframed the entire year. What looked like another lost season suddenly felt like the foundation of something new. Instead of entering the offseason desperate, the Browns entered it curious. Curious about growth, curious about potential, curious about how much better this could get with real support. Hope is fragile in Cleveland. It doesn't come easily, and it doesn't last unless it's earned. In just a handful of games, Shedeur Sanders earned it. This is where Shedeur Sanders' story stops being impressive and starts becoming genuinely rare. Because everything about his rise cuts against how the NFL usually works, especially at quarterback. A fifth-round pick isn't supposed to matter this quickly. Historically, quarterbacks drafted that late are insurance policies, practice squad depth, clipboard holders, long-term projects who might get a snap or two if disaster strikes. The league doesn't build around them. It waits for them to fail quietly. And yet here we are. Shedeur Sanders didn't just earn snaps, he earned respect. In 6 starts, he forced opposing defenses to treat him like a real problem. That alone puts him in rare company. Most fifth-round quarterbacks never reach the stage where defensive coordinators lose sleep over them, let alone division rivals publicly acknowledging the challenge. Think about how fast this happened. Sanders went from draft day afterthought to being discussed in game planning meetings across the AFC North. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a quarterback shows traits that translate immediately: processing speed, composure, and the ability to punish mistakes. Those traits don't care about draft slot. What makes this even more unusual is the timeline. NFL development is slow by design. Teams usually give young quarterbacks layers of protection, simplified reads, limited responsibilities, heavy run support. Sanders didn't get that luxury. He was thrown into real situations, against real defenses with real pressure, and instead of shrinking, he adapted. That's why his draft position keeps coming up, not to limit him, but because it highlights how wrong the league might have been. Fifth-round quarterbacks aren't supposed to accelerate like this. They're supposed to plateau, flash briefly, then fade. Sanders did the opposite. He stabilized an offense. He raised the floor. He made teammates better. And once that happens, draft labels lose power. This is where history becomes relevant. Very few quarterbacks drafted outside the early rounds ever force organizations to rethink their plans this fast. Fewer still earn praise from rival head coaches and veterans in their own locker room before a full season has even passed. That combination, external respect and internal trust, is the real indicator that something different is happening. Sanders isn't breaking the mold with hype or marketing. He's breaking it by doing the hardest thing in professional football, showing that the position isn't too big for him. At this point, the fifth-round label says more about the league's evaluation process than it does about him. Because when a quarterback drafted that late changes how a franchise thinks, prepares, and plans for the future, the story stops being about where he was picked and starts being about how far he can go. This is where the story tightens, not because of playoff implications, those are already gone, but because of what this game represents. When the Cleveland Browns face the Cincinnati Bengals in the season finale, it won't be about standings. It'll be about answers. For Shedeur Sanders, this is the cleanest stage possible. A division rival, a defense that knows him is coming, and a head coach on the other sideline, Zac Taylor, who already admitted publicly that preparing for him isn't easy. That matters, because respect raises expectations, and expectations turn moments into tests. This game is symbolic in ways the box score won't capture. Sanders isn't just playing the Bengals. He's playing the doubt that followed him into the league. He's playing the draft label. He's playing the idea that his early success might fade once defenses adjust. Division games expose that faster than anything else, especially in the AFC North. And the matchup is loaded with contrast. On one side, Joe Burrow, the established star, the benchmark, the quarterback every young passer in the division is measured against. On the other, Sanders, the rookie who wasn't supposed to be here this fast, now tasked with going toe-to-toe in a game that suddenly feels bigger than it should. That's the pressure point. If Sanders plays composed, protects the football, and keeps Cleveland competitive, the conversation changes again. Not dramatically, quietly. Front offices don't overreact to one game, but they do remember how players handle moments like this, especially when those moments come after weeks of progress instead of flashes. This is also the last impression before the offseason. Coaches, executives, and scouts will replay these snaps endlessly. How he handles blitz looks, how he responds after mistakes, how the huddle sounds when things tighten late. These details matter more now than touchdowns. And that's why this finale feels pivotal, not because it crowns anything, but because it clarifies everything. If Sanders looks like he belongs here, the Browns enter the offseason building with him, not searching around him. That's a massive difference. One more steady performance doesn't make a franchise quarterback, but it can close a chapter and open a very different one. And sometimes, that's all it takes for everything to change. There's a big difference between hype and validation, and Shedeur Sanders has officially crossed that line. Hype comes from fans, highlights, and hot takes. Validation comes from the people who have every reason to doubt you and still can't. That's why the words from Zac Taylor matter so much. This wasn't a former teammate or a friendly analyst talking up a nice story. This was a division rival, a coach whose job depends on stopping the Cleveland Browns, a Nebraska alum admitting he watched Colorado games because of a player he was supposed to dislike. That kind of respect doesn't come from kindness, it comes from reality. And the reality is this: Shedeur Sanders has forced people to change how they talk about him. In just a handful of starts, he's gone from interesting fifth-round flyer to problem defenses must account for. He's earned praise from rivals, trust from teammates, and belief from a fan base that has been burned too many times to believe easily. That combination is rare, and when it happens this early, it usually means the trajectory is real. What makes this moment so important isn't just what Sanders has already done, it's what it changes moving forward. The Browns aren't entering the offseason blind anymore. They're not desperately searching for answers at quarterback. They're evaluating how to protect, support, and maximize one they may already have. That shift matters, because franchises don't turn corners when everything is perfect. They turn corners when clarity replaces confusion. And for the first time in years, Cleveland has clarity at the most important position in sports. Not certainty, but clarity. Enough to build, enough to commit, enough to stop resetting the clock. And here's the part that should excite fans the most. Sanders hasn't peaked. He hasn't arrived as a finished product. He's still learning, still adjusting, still stacking progress week by week. The respect he's earned so far isn't for what he is, it's for what he's becoming. That's why this story feels different. Rival coaches don't hand out compliments unless they're worried. Veterans don't follow rookies unless they believe. And fan bases don't feel hope unless it's been earned on the field. Shedeur Sanders has checked all three boxes. And when enemies confirm the truth before the league fully catches up, it usually means something special is already in motion. The only real question left is how far this goes, and whether Cleveland is finally ready to let it.